Actually, at some point, it would be good to talk about the healthcare records and stuff like that.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, let's do it. We're going to do it sort of now.
Yeah, we sort of obviously we're going with the flow on how it's been done at the moment. So definitely we can get discussion and stuff like that afterwards if you want to. We can discuss any of this comments and stuff that's coming through. So yeah, we're good, Rachel.
Oh, good. Okay, cool. Okay. Kia ora and welcome back to the afternoon discussion. So this is the 10 AM session or 11 AM session on digital legislation. A bit late. My interest in this comes about because I used to be a lawyer. I had 11 years as a lawyer, but I also had studied operations research and maths, and I've always been interested in structures and organising and how things work, and interested in how decisions are made in the wider legal system. I stepped away from law because I wanted to do stuff that was a bit more innovative and a bit more where you could take a few more risks and didn't have to have the right answer to everything all of the time. And I'm currently a senior advisor innovation here in the lab. Part of my work and working on digital inclusion for another part. Until Wednesday, where I go to a new role elsewhere at DIA, walking the talk of the approach we take in the lab here in birth, marriages, citizenship and passports within Department of Internal Affairs in New Zealand. So last year I was part of a team of 5 who got chosen to go on an exchange to the Home Office in the UK, and we were picked for a development opportunity really to go and follow up our interests and learn about how things were done in the digital environment over there. And we took some time because we were New Zealanders and we were flying all that way, and if there's a stopover, you always got to make the most of those airfares. So we stopped off in San Francisco on the way over, and I had a particular interest in how regulation could be used to become code, or how we could, the idea generally was digital legislation and finding out more. So I kind of thought I'd start with this about looking at the difference between what is digital, because that came up a lot. And so in the UK, they kind of talk a lot about digital, meaning we're in the digital space. And the best definition, and the most common one that people bandy around, I think, is this one: applying the culture, practices, and processes and technologies of the internet era to respond to people's raised expectations. Whereas when it comes to legislation and law, we still are based on a system that was designed to apply the culture, practices, processes, and technologies of the Middle Ages, somewhat evolved over time. But a lot of our actual processes, things like having a first reading of a bill, literally came back to where someone took, this is pre-paper, get the goat skin and read out what's put on it and read it 3 times. That's kind of where you get first, second, and third reading, before we had a printing press. And now things have evolved from that. We now print copious quantities of legislation, but the culture there is not at all, if we were to develop and decide on how to do legislation now, we wouldn't do it the way we do. That's not to say that everything is bad, and far from it. There are a lot of hidden checks and balances and accountability frameworks and ability to apply human judgment and do politicking that even the most perfect solution technologically won't replicate. Yeah, won't replicate. So it's one of those things where what I've become increasingly aware, and as I've been working in this innovation space in government, is that the perfect answer, a lot of people I have my ideal answer, here it is, out at this extreme, oh, not extreme, but this seems right, why don't you just do this? And there's actually a huge gap. Government often, there's the importance of what the right answer is, and there's the pathway to how you get there. And that's just as important, because we don't have the luxury of starting from scratch. That said, one philosophy that Pia advocates very strongly in the lab is actually we need to have an idea of what good looks like as well, so we can steer towards it rather than just incrementing from where we are. So it's sort of a bit falutin background, but yeah. So the other challenge that was issued in this one in Sanford, I'll let you read that.
So the blockchain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Michael Genesera from Stanford. And yeah, so the whole field of computational law, the way Michael kind of says, well, what if you actually could know the laws as they affect you? What if you could have that information just in time? And there's different reasons that we have law. There's different elements to it. And one of the things that when I was over in the UK, I kind of really had a chance to have really good discussions with John Sheridan at National Archives, Dan Barrett from the UK Parliament, and some of the guys at Codex in Stanford, and tease out some assumptions, because having been a lawyer, I kind of know the general frameworks, but to tease out some assumptions that I had and look at how law is organised and what it actually does in a bit more detail. So one of the concepts that John introduced me to was from a guy called Daniel Ben Cohen, I think it was. So the difference between conduct rules and decision rules. And conduct rules are the things that in this distinction, the things that I need to know how to behave and what to do. I need to know I need to do something. So I shouldn't stamp someone. I'll have to pay a tax return. There are road rules I'll need to obey. Whereas the decision rules, how a decision is made, we don't all need to articulate the formula for paying income tax right now. So conduct rules, we need to know that we have some obligation to pay tax. We don't need to know the detail, but it's really important that those conduct rules are widely known and freely available. And because if they're not, I mean, ignorance of the law is an old principle. Ignorance of the law is no defence. So it stands. Reason, justice, fairness requires that we should be able to find out what the law is, and we should be able to find it easily. So conduct rules and decision rules. Conduct rules need to be widely and freely available. Decision rules need to be available as well, but when you need them, and they need to be transparent. So if a decision is being taken about me, one of the principles in our Official Information Act is that I should have the right to reasons for a decision. So I need to see when I calculate my working for families tax credit, I need to be able to see the calculation, show you're working. So that comes into accountability and transparency, and in the bigger field of digital rights, algorithmic transparency. I need to actually not only trust that you've done things right, but your magical box is not so magical, and I can see how it's actually worked. And one area we don't have a lot of transparency at the moment is in what advertising we get shown on Google and Facebook, and how our search results are, what it is that's put in front of us that nudges our beliefs and our behaviours, how that comes about. But when it comes to government and relationship with people, it's pretty essential that we have that transparency. And you can have all that, and you can still have a system that pretty much sucks to be part of, that's difficult, that's messy, that's awkward, that doesn't reflect reality. And so ease is another thing that we get into a bit here, because it's not something which is an added cost. Actually, if you do it right, it actually is often cheaper once you've re-engineered all the processes and helped people transition from one to another. But from the ease point of view, my accounting software might calculate my tax for me. So that's NYOB and Xero have worked with Inland Revenue to be able to do. So we've got, from a personal point of view, this is what I need. I need to know, and this is not magical or necessarily perfect or thorough, I need to know roughly what I need to do and be able to find that. So in government, we work on stuff like gov.nz to have, a lot of our work in the lab is actually just giving people the stuff they need to know and access to it more easily from their point of view. I need to be able to find out what the rules are for decisions when I need to, and that needs to be transparent. And it needs to be easy. Oh, nervous. Yay. Is that right? Oh, I might have gone too far. Oh, maybe not. What? Hang on, let's do it this way. No, it's frozen. That's right. So when it comes to knowing what the law is, I need to know the law. And there's a difference between law that's machine readable, which means someone can produce the law in front of me, and what's machine consumable. When I started studying law, because I'm older than I look, I hope, the law was pretty much mostly in books, and you could look them up. And we had these marvellous things called CDs, or statutes, and you could put them into the CD drive of the computer, and here I can find the law. But pretty much they were at that stage, I think, mostly like online PDFs. So they were a representation of the page that I could display on my screen. It might have had a little bit of linking and searching content, but it wasn't. It was mostly a picture, a flat picture. So I mean, that's good. That was way better than what we had before. But the more that you actually make that text, break it down so that it can be displayed in, I think the languages, I'm not a language expert, is it XML or legal XML? And make stuff machine readable and find it and then start linking the stuff in between it, the more you can actually find out what the law is. And the next thing is like machine consumable. And so I had a chat with John, and I had initially went over to the UK thinking, well, surely we could be able to make all our law available as code, and imagine that how would that be if you could just consume it by the thing, I'm marvelous with this, and he kind of said, well, actually, it's harder than it looks. And to do that, we are really lucky in New Zealand. We have some of the best availability of our law in the world. One of the things that I found to my horror is in the UK, some states assert copyright in law, so they won't even let someone publish it for free, or you have to go up to the Supreme Court to argue for the right to not have to pay to see the law that affects you. I mean, it seems bonkers, but I'm not kidding. Yeah, I've got a link I can show if you like. But yeah, you need to, in New Zealand, we're also simple. We're unicameral. We have one legislature. We don't have the House of Commons and House of Lords. For the UK, John introduced me to a few concepts, one of which was, you know, when you're actually looking at what the law is, it's not enough to see what is the law, it's what is the law now, and what is the law here at this point in time. Hello. In the UK, different pieces of legislation are brought into effect section by section, and they might chuck something on the statute books, and then they'll bring it in Wales one time and Scotland another time. And so you need to know, at any place where you're trying to reference a statute, you need to know actually what is the law now, what is the law in this place at this time. And so you have to start linking all the pieces of the law together and hope that the bits between the sections all join up. There'll be a section that brings something into a force, and there'll be a section, they might be consistent, they might not be, but that's the way we've always done law. It started off with those parchment things, and it gets progressively more complex. So we've our team here at Statutes NZ at the Parliamentary Council office have done that work already, and so they have started. They have quite a lot of the concepts and things that are linked between statutes are already linked, and we have. Is everyone familiar with the idea of refactoring? I came to it only a couple of years ago. It's a new concept to me. You know, once upon a time when you wrote computer code, I think this is where it comes from. I might be just about to give you a fiction. Once upon a time when you wrote computer code, you'd write 10, 20, 30 and wrote your lines, if this, then that, or whatever your language was. And then you might want to actually do something extra. So you rather than going 10, 20, 30, you do 11, 12, 13, 14. And then you need more, so you need to refactor. And so you'd renumber the whole lot. And basically you tidy it up and start and move on. And so refactoring from that is kind of like when you look at what you've built, and a bit like when you wire a house and you keep on adding on a room and you keep on running a wire from one room to the next. At some point you just want to rewire the whole place and put it in a bit more logical structure. And refactoring is a bit like that. It's sort of, we're just going to tidy up. We're not going to add anything new, but we're going to do some work to just tidy up what we do have. And the Parliamentary Council office do that for legislation. They every so often we'll do a consolidated statute with all the amendments all in one space. And they have done things like interpretation acts, so that when the word working day is used in an act, it has the meaning it has in this one act. So it's kind of like a built-in definitions section that covers all statutes. But each individual statute then tends to have its own, or they always have their own definitions section. Definition of income in one particular context might be different from one in another. And so there isn't currently a common ontology of like a definition of references. So legislation isn't quite as easy as there are a few challenges in trying to ingest it and make it into code. So the other let me see if I can get this to move on. Okay. The other thing about law that makes it tricky is that, particularly in the common law systems, the law isn't in the law. When a statute is, you think like, well, the law on something will be in the Act said that, the law on housing is in the Housing Act. And it kind of, some of it is, but when a statute's passed, the traditional thing is that we have a common law, so it's as type, custom and practice evolves, except as changed by statute, and Parliament can change anything. But a statute just in New Zealand, unlike our colleague in France, is just what's changed about the law most of the time. And we may codify, when we talk about codifying law in a legal sense means taking what's in the common law and writing it down and making it a complete system. So we used to only have evidence that was given in court used to be subject to the common law of evidence, and then we introduced the Evidence Act 1993, so we wrote it down. We wrote down what the usual custom and practice was. And so that's codifying law, and it's nothing to do with computer coding, and it's one of those words that phrases that kind of slips, you can easily slip up on. So law, some few societal things about law, it's passed to achieve some policy objectives, or sometimes if someone wants to achieve something by doing something, to stop something, to encourage something, to make something happen. And maybe in the common law, maybe the evolution of change. So the common law could adapt to blockchain without ever writing a statute thing, by reference, by analogy of saying, well, these are the principles of negligence or whatever, this will apply. So it can evolve to do stuff. We have the common law. France has a common law code, which is much more, we're going to write down what the rules are in one place. That's actually a little easier to deal with. The other thing, I just chuck that in there, that once you put the law in the data set, you can see how people use it, get all that metadata, and actually learn quite a lot from how the law is being used. So the more you codify, the more that you put it in code and can see how people use it, you can see patterns and start to treat it like data and do quite a lot of data science on it as well. Yeah, so coming back to that, I talked about how in the lab we try and look at what good looks like. And I don't think, I was just thinking, I'm not promoting my employer's thing, but you're all paying for this in your taxes, so I feel like it's more like giving you value for money than actual promoting against the code. But yeah, so if we've just done some work, if we had rules that were human and machine consumable, that are effective for good service delivery, then we would know what the rules are, which it should be so obvious it goes without saying, but actually you have to say it because it's not automatic. The original thing you set out to do, the policy, will be meeting the original intent. We'll be able to implement it effectively and efficiently. People will have better experience. The whole process reflects our values and the values of law and society. And law can be machine consumable, not just readable. So I sort of mentioned earlier that digital legislation, just here is the picture of what's on the Act is one thing, but actually here is some meaning. If I was to give the Act, the Holidays Act as an example, I don't know if you're familiar with the Holidays Act, but it calculates people's annual leave based on the assumption that everyone works 40 hours a week, Monday to Friday, and other things are an exception, and that you have a normal working week. And actually that's less and less common. In our payroll systems, your Xero clip-ons or MYOB clip-on, they don't work in weeks, they work in hours. Or they work in years. They don't. The way that we organise, the way the law has been designed, doesn't match how we are implementing it these days. So there's a case to actually start looking at law and refactoring it to meet the way that we use some of it currently. The Holidays Act's a little bit contentious because a lot of people don't like it or don't like different things about it, and it's also been a real challenge because this is what's been written in the papers, so I read this on stuff, that 3 different payroll providers had all implemented the changes to the Holidays Act, and each one of them was wrong, including the one that the Labour inspectors and of course the Holidays Act were being paid with. So yeah, it's because the Act was itself written in a confusing way. So the problem we found when we did the work is that policy and regulation is hard to read and understand, so that means that it's hard to be productive and transparent and open. There's often a gap. What you start off trying to do, and the rates rebate we've written about, that's one of it. You start out with one intent, and then by the time you actually end up at service delivery, you're delivering on what's been asked for, but you're not actually delivering on what you set out to do. The current way that policy and legislation at the moment, and this is what I realised this morning, it's actually set up to guide the judgment of humans. It's not set up to have the answers, it's set up to guide human judgment. Because once upon a time it was the Lord of the Manor who got to make those judgments. And so we have to be a little careful with our rule set as to what things are capable of being coded and what aren't. Our traditional policy and drafting model, which I'll get into in a moment, doesn't actually scale. doesn't actually match where we are, because that's kind of like we design our solution, we hand our solution over to put into legislation, and we implement it. And our whole political system often relies on, well, the underlying assumption is that the politician will have an answer, the right answer, or they'll argue about the right answer is, and they'll debate that and put that in place, rather than actually allowing for a period of testing and discovery and iteration. So there's some challenges in that. And at the moment, it's quite fragmented. So here, this is just, sorry, this, you might want to come up and look more closely at the diagram. But current state, this is what we mapped out, is that currently in the policy development, you kind of do some research, we might do, as policy analysts, I might do some desktop research, go and consult some people, put out a white paper or a green paper, and these, I don't know where they came from, but it's the traditional, we will write down what we think, we will put it out, people will say what they think, and then we'll do this all academic and this intellectual process, and then we will go and write a paper for the minister, say, Minister, here are some options, and the minister will say, I pick this one, and then that goes up to cabinet, and the minister says to cabinet, I recommend this for these reasons, but we have thought, we have done some work, we have added some, crunched some numbers, and the cabinet will say, yes, do this thing, and then a paper will go to the parliamentary drafters and say, aha, we have decided to do this thing, make it so in writing, and the drafters will say, aha, okay, thank you for my instructions in this long thing, this document. Now, all of the work that was set behind probably doesn't get to the drafter. So the drafter looks at what the law is. Oh, this top is chronic because it thinks it reacts as double touching on these machines. The drafter will then say, okay, well, based on what you've got me in this nice, clear brief of what I'm to do, here are some stuff, and this is how it interacts to the rest of the law, and I have a lovely draft, and then that goes to Parliament, and then people make submissions, and people propose amendments, and they say, change this word to that word, and if you're lucky, they'll have some advice from the drafters in that, but maybe they won't, and they will use a word that is used in a different way somewhere else, and it won't be immediately apparent the problems that what seems to be nice and simple on the surface will cause down the track. And then once you've got your actual statute in there, then it goes to the operational team, who probably don't have the brief that went to the legislative team, and they probably don't have all the decision trees and the logic and the stuff that's done in here. You know, within the best will in the world, because the policy team are on something else by then, and they traditionally have a split between policy and operations anyway. And so these guys, the service design is looking at, well, actually what you've said isn't hugely practical. It's nice in theory, but in practice, we can make that work, but I don't know if that's going to do what you actually wanted it to do in the first place. And so the feedback loop is really long and complicated. Legislative process costs a number of $250 million. You have to bid for time. We bid for money to fund stuff in government. We have to bid for legislative time as well. So there's only a limited amount of parliamentary time and things to get through. And so that, yeah, I've just talked about this. So the current state is that and this is something that we're talking before about boundary things like pseudocode, that there's each of the group, the policy analysts and drafters have their own standards and frameworks and models. The rules analysts have a different one, and software developers have a different one. And then there's the people who actually operate on the ground. So it's all kind of siloed at the moment. So we sort of took an example of rates rebate and looked at, I don't know if this is interesting, but the legislation, a person may, if on the relevant date, pseudocode is saying, well, a person, that's a thing that's defined. This is defined, and then it ends up looking like that in the code. And this is used for nothing other than having these people and these people having a common view of the world. It's something that what Matt said earlier, it's really useful for that. Okay, so if we got to a future state where we use shared things, I mean, it seems like rocket scientist, shared standards, shared models, and kind of could look around and have that common view, then we can get better quality stuff out the other end. We'll just look through this because it's late in the afternoon and everyone's tired. And if we got to a future state for policy, we had everyone together, iterating together forward rather than doing something and throwing it over the fence. Oh, wouldn't that be a better world? Okay. Oh yeah, this is sort of like, so what we need to do that, we need knowledge assets that are common standards, multidisciplinary teams looking at things, rather than consulting on our draft legislation, co-creating, bringing people in a lot earlier, testing stuff a lot earlier, and in the end, let's see, I think that just provides a better legislation. Oh yeah. So what we learned, these things are good, common stuff, and yeah. they're just the people that I've talked, part of the development of this, people are worth following on Twitter if this is something you care about. Nadia and Pia in our lab team, John Sheridan at National Archives in the UK, Dan Barrett at UK Parliamentary Digital Service, Richard Pope, also from the UK, and Codex at Stanford. So there is a late afternoon version of an early morning thing about something that's quite dry to start with. So thank you for staying awake. Did anyone want to have a talk about anything particular?
That was really well done.
Thank you. Come. Yeah, so the short is we're really lucky here. Our situation sucks in some ways, but it sucks less than everywhere else. Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, do people want to grab it? What do you want to do now? We can talk about. Is everyone just tired? Or would you like to talk about code and law, or digital identity, or governance, or what do people want to do? I'm interested in water.
What was the plan?
So the plan was to discuss some things.
Okay.
I'm gonna need more cartoons.
Cartoon.
Why don't maybe?
Oh.
Yeah. So does anyone? I mean, are you kind of? What do you feel like? Is there something?
I'm really happy to listen.
Yeah, it's that kind of day.
That's didn't get sleep last night kind of day. But no, I mean, as far as what's being discussed, I mean, code versus law, I think is something really interesting. Just trying to sort of talk about, or think sort of some of the ideas that you just discussed, with some of the stuff around sort of like blockchain and like some of the ideology that goes into that.
Yeah.
Like there's a lot of groups that closely align with anarchy and is very much anti-law, anti-legislation. But I mean, as far as like the discussions that you like ran through as far as like this is what law and legislation can be in more technical concepts. Like I think there's like an interface there as far as like where does it sort of come into that space as far as are they necessarily required when you can sort of create law and legislation that is technical code, or is it still that sacred realm where you do need to have particular people that can have that interpretation?
Yeah. Do you want to come in? Come here. Yeah, I haven't. I mean, I haven't. What's really struck me with blockchain is it's more or less that people hope it to be, and that it's just another technology. It's another technology with some tulip bubble, South Seas bubble. Hi, man, next bandwagon Bitcoin. Yeah. But if Emperor has no influence, or not very many, or really, I want to use all this resource to do that. Yeah, but that said, it also is more than that. It's just not it's the height, not necessarily the biggest potential. Well, yeah, there is potential, but I think I really don't know enough about it, but I think the whole thing of computational law is where I'm a bit more interested, because blockchain is a technology, but the more that as we get to be able to take rule sets and rules engines, which I don't know what they are, but the things that if this then that you can plug into computer systems and they act as data input into a computer model or a tool that by consuming, by sucking on that, just relying on that, it can do stuff out of the other, like pay you, for example, the right amount, or calculate your holiday time, or tell you as you're driving along that the speed limit is something here, or that in this county the laws just changed and you can't turn left at a red light, you have to, you know how in America, some parts of America you can turn left on a red light. I don't turn right on a red light, whereas in New Zealand you have to wait even if nothing's coming. There's different, yeah. So
I constantly get tutored for that.
For turning or not turning.
No, in the States, when you're driving in the States, and I'm sitting there waiting for the lights.
Change, yeah. So I mean, if this stuff, the more that we kind of move forward to a place where we can create and develop things that allow us to build tools and fundamentally it's not actually about technology, it's about knowing what your rights and obligations are when you need to know that. It's the service design, the human challenge, if you like. A lot of it is about humans rather than about and technology is an enabler, but not an end in itself.
Do you know what I don't see in any of what we're doing today?
Yes.
Tell me if I've missed a chapter, but I don't see any direct translation into how you'd be able to take this stuff and apply it in the actual into a smart contract or into a tech. I mean, is there a low level
probably the closest. I mean, hashtag not a technologist.
Yeah, I mean, not that I am, but it's more like, so.
The closest is this.
I saw it, but you had the middle.
Like the
Yeah, 3
pseudocode.
columns.
Yeah, the pseudocode and the actual code. So that's sort of, yeah, I was too busy getting people in to listen to the blockchain session last night, so I'm still kind of learning myself. But
would there be any follow-up conversations along the lines of, if you want to bring up that slide, because it's worthwhile. That slide in particular is one that I thought, out of all of this, is the thing that I'm actually really interested in.
okay,
Because
cool.
how do I directly translate something that we agree to? And
Yeah.
it's just a question of I need to learn Ethereum's language.
Well, this is not about the.
So what I was just talking with Wendy before was work that yeah. So there's a number of different ways to represent law or contract. Some of the work, for example, was being done around that Rachel mentioned was legal ML, which is saying a legal markup language. And that means that it's consumable by a machine. And at least consumable in the sense that it can read and interpret and there's some sort of structure. But going further in terms of how do you take that pseudocode or whatever and actually produce a proper legally binding contract from it. That's the sort of work that there's kind of 2 areas that's being done in that. One is the work that is happening out of like Common Accord, Project Accord, and Clause, which is the Accord project, and Cordia R3 are all sort of doing. They follow a basic sort of structure whereby they've got a human language representation of the contract, but it's got smatterings of code and parameters. So we can basically parameterize this contract or this particular thing for whatever the situation is. Now, the classic example is like the ISDA sort of derivative contracts that are used in finance. They've sort of used to be that derivative contracts were pretty much over-the-counter, pairwise sort of negotiated sort of things. And then they've come through and created a whole bunch of standardized contracts on different types of financial products, and then you just parameterize it. So you parameterize the amount, the maturity dates, and various other terms and stuff like that. And that reduces the cost of negotiating a trade, right? And so you're sort of seeing that idea being propagated further, which is we've got some sort of human readable form that's got some parameters in it. We bind those 2 together, and there may in fact be the 3rd bit, which is some executable code that goes along with it.
Yeah, and that's what I was thinking to start to bubble up.
Right. And so you're seeing that sort of in project. Hyperledger Composer is sort of predicated on that. The work that Project Accord is doing is sort of doing that work. Cordia R3 uses something sort of called Kraken, which is basically the same sort of thing. You've got Common Accord, which is trying to provide structure to the contracts in the markup language, but they sort of fill the same area. So that's kind of document templating / minimal code. The more extreme, the more distant possible future is the work that legalese are doing with regards to actual programming languages that have a legal basis.
Yeah.
Okay. So that is finding how to express different domains of the law as a programming language such that you can apply tools and stuff, compilers, etc. So a lawyer can sit down and write the code in a contract, form that spits out to EVM or to the Ethereum virtual machine, or the LE1 for Cardano, if that, when that comes around, or WASM for EOS or something else like that. So these are all the abstract machine virtual machines that are used in these different blockchain networks. And the idea here is, well, the compiler or the toolset could take out the chunks that it knows can work on those blockchains and will automatically produce the code that was required.
Yeah.
And then some of the other supporting business process stuff that surrounds that could be also spat out. So that's kind of, that's not exactly the work that Ming and stuff are doing in legalese, but the same sort of notion.
So that's actually being discussed in circles.
Yes, it's actually quite old. A lot of this has sort of been discussed for quite a long time. And so one of the questions is sort of what makes this attempt different to the previous attempts to try and represent law as some sort of programming language, and why do we think that what Ming and what legalese are trying to do has a chance of succeeding? And sort of one aspect is there's been significant advances in the underlying theory to help, and there's just quite recently. Secondly, we've got open source, so people are a lot more familiar with the idea of open source and how code can be produced as a common good. So you can bring a lot of minds and discussions around that. Another aspect is the formal method stuff that I was talking about last night, which is because now we've got funding to focus on formal methods and application to making code safe in a non-controlled environment. So as in like controlling an aeroplane or a nuclear power plant or something else like that. That's safety. The idea of code safety is now migrating across into the notions of legal contracts, writing a legal contract. We need to know that there's going to be no holes in it. So formal methods and the associated logics and stuff that go along with it have advanced as well and can help us out in that regard. Then, so that brings along the fourth sort of reason is that because there's this whole blockchain ICO sort of focus, sort of new, if you like, ways of funding projects, rightly or wrongly, there's a huge amount of interest being now focused on this domain. So there's huge effort going in at different levels to actually produce this sort of things. So those are some of the reasons why they could possibly be successful now. But it's not an easy task to do that for. And so there's quite a lot of work. What you've got at the moment is that, so if you took Ethereum, the Ethereum started off with basically, well, Bitcoin was the first one with the scripting language in it. Ethereum came along and said, well, hey, we need to have loops. And so we get pretty much a representation of traditional programming language, general purpose programming languages represented in Ethereum. So Solidity is an example of that. You're starting to now get projects that are starting to look at the programming languages more from a functional programming point of view. So Michelin for the TSOS Foundation, the TSOS network is a functional programming language for writing smart contracts. So that's lifting the level of abstraction slightly higher. Oddities in that, but okay. So again, Cardano is introducing the idea of Plutus, which is got, from a functional programming heritage point of view, formally proven that sort of stuff. And again, lifting the semantic level slightly. Not up to the same level that L4 and legalese is trying to do, but it nonetheless is sort of lifting the bar. And so there's a lot of interest in that sort of stuff going on.
So I suppose for me it's a question of, in this room or in the collection in Wellington, who's actually interested in actually writing those contracts?
Writing the contracts within the context of, say, Solidity.
If I wanted to integrate some of the decisions I make for the client into a blockchain, who would I talk to?
So most of the focus on the contracts at the moment and things are around relatively simple financial type products that we were talking about last night. So that's where a lot of the focus is. A lot of the things around like ERC20 tokens and how do you set them up and do that. The more sophisticated sort of like implementation of overall contracts, I guess some people are looking at that, but I haven't seen a huge amount.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Yeah.
The blockchain labs here in Wellington is doing that. I know there's quite a few software developers, but they're coming from a software development background, not a legal background. So they're going, oh, this is new shiny tech. I know JavaScript type situation. We'll go in and we'll try and write secure code. Right.
I suppose the angle I have is it's very quick to throw words around like this, and I know we're at the beginning, all of us are at the beginning, not the beginning, but a lot of this is new. But coming to a group like government or like EV or like whoever and say we can protect you as technology is almost premature.
Yes, I think it's yeah. So most of the discussion that you'll have around blockchains and stuff is more in wonder. Oh, this great possibility and stuff like that. That's pretty much where it's at.
So the best solution would actually just be very, very granular as to what tasks you pick up, and rather just test it, try it, and eventually.
Very much so. So I mean, certainly that's the mindset within the data commons. So ultimately, if the data commons was successful, it's got to have something like L4, legalese L4, which is a solid representation of.
Sorry, do you work for legally?
No.
Sorry.
It's just Wendy.
I was just had lots of questions about it.
So that would be the ultimate realization of sort of machine readable and executable contracts. But even if I had L4 today and was able to use it today, I've got a bigger problem of expertise from the legal standpoint, expertise from the interpretation standpoint, say from a judiciary's situation, how to interpret some of that. So there's a certain amount of practice that has to develop over a period of time in order to actually understand how to build these things.
Is that perhaps why Alex is particularly interested in legal and crypto, trying to see the opportunity in that space?
Yeah.
There's obviously a shortage of people who can actually take some sort of agreement or legislation and actually translate that into something that can be used. I think it seems like there's a massive case.
So there's a general notion that unpopular, but basically there's not enough blockchain engineers to match with the idea of all the money that's spawning around in this space.
Yeah.
Because it's not programming as usual in the sense because one, you've got all the security dimensions of it too, but secondly, you're actually trying to create these business processes that run across different organizational boundaries and doing things in that front. And that's quite different than what most software developers are used to programming.
And you've got to test the code, you've got to fuzz it, you've got to test all permutations and actually see if it actually behaves the way you expect it to.
Yeah.
That's the formula.
Yeah. Well, not just formal methods. I mean, it's like doing proper testing. When I say, ideally, absolutely.
Yeah, all those parameterizations need to go through some sort of stress test to go, are we expecting all these results? Because at some point we might break something.
So if I was doing it properly, it would be including things like formal methods, but I'd also be looking at simulation frameworks and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Massive simulation frameworks to actually go through.
To fuzz all the parameters and ultimately project that goes.
And whatever was going on.
But we also, so I was just going to interject there, we also have to then trust people who are doing this to actually create these to the right standard, because we have no blockchain standards as yet, for instance, or other companies. No, I think that New Zealand's trying to get on board internationally that way, but there's nothing to say that this developer has done something just now that we can kind of trust. And how do we know if we're not programmers, for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, this is a dichotomy at the moment. A lot of it with, say, for example, blockchain and Bitcoin, is that actually, a lot of people go around and say, hey, it's decentralized and blah, blah, blah. But in reality, the actual power of deciding what goes into the network is concentrated in a few individuals who are called developers, who are not necessarily accountable in the broad sense of the word. What was there's a Ethereum proposal that came through a few months ago, which was actually trying to formalize the process of making decisions around when we could do things like a Ethereum fork. I can't remember the proposal number, 700 or something. But one of the principal editors for the proposals resigned because of this one proposal, because all of a sudden it now exposes this huge amount of liability risk. So he didn't want to take on that responsibility, so he resigned. Because here you've got a situation where there's significant value being installed in these networks, but there's a small cabal, if you like, of individuals that have got a voice over what's going through and what's being approved by the community. I just hope that the class action issues, if I don't like your decision, then I'm going to sue the shit out of it. Because there's commercial value in concept. That was just sort of one of the interesting sort of things that came through. I think it's.
So how does that affect you? Don't you vote?
No, Ethereum doesn't have a proof of stake at the moment.
Okay. So these people are proof of work.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Yeah. The intention is to upgrade Ethereum to proof of stake, some sort of proof of stake. But as far as I'm aware, it doesn't have that at the moment.
no, yeah.
Certainly didn't work from the
Then how can you
original.
be held liable for something that?
So these are changes to like doing a hard fork.
Okay.
So when the DAO came along, who makes the decisions about to change the main network to have a hard fork and makes the code changes. How does that process get formalized? And this was what this particular process was about, was how do we formalize making that decision? And all of a sudden that opens up a small group of people to potentially being sued quite substantially because of those decisions. So practice, if you like, around all of this space. So it's pretty limited. It's really, really limited. It is a new field, which is kind of what makes it quite interesting. But at the same time, because it is new, most of the claims and stuff around Bitcoin, blockchains, etc., are in the sort of one-woman stage. Why I've got all these possibilities, what we can do. What is really, really nice about it, I have to say, is that it's getting people thinking about accounting databases. It's getting people thinking about economics. It's getting people thinking about the information and technology.
And it's all around business reshuffling in a lot of ways.
Making people think afresh, making people, yeah.
When your first line was, the discussion of how, things were formulated before we okay, and we were writing those things. Now we actually reflect those
Right, and so there's a big argument. One of the arguments that is put across is that actually it's not so much money that's been the big changer; it's the form of money, largely the form of ledgers, that has had a big impact on society over the years. So as we record records of what we do over time, it changes the structure of society. So we can start off with community forms, sort of trade tablets, etc., and actually go further than that, development on goat skin, etc., to record things. The double entry accounting radically changed stuff from the 1400s, etc. So these sort of methods and tools to actually record and account for our interactions as a society. The technology that underpins them had a significant change in the way society is structured. And that's sort of one of the arguments as to why we have this sort of awe and wonder around this particular type of technology. But as far as I'm concerned, some of it, it's still pretty nascent, and I know the complexities associated with it. Even the sort of simple things around consensus mechanisms is not clear cut at all. So there's a lot of discussion around proof of work, there's proof of stake, there's delegated proof of stake, and variations of proof of stake, or proof of this, proof of that. There's actually no clear cut rule of thumb about what isn't going to work. Some things just aren't going to work, but to do a consensus mechanism is a lot of work. And the fusing the simulation is a big part of it. How will this actually, let alone all the other stuff. That said, the idea of the cryptographic ledger is actually used for a cryptographic record of entangled items or creating archival bonds is actually useful in and of itself. And we use that all the time if you're a software developer, you use something like Git. Yeah. Actually, that's particularly even if you That is sort of keeping a revision history, but the way it does it is through cryptographic link using hashes to track. Yeah. If you put GPG, so if you sign in with a GPG key, you're strengthening that bond even more in each of those commits. But it's largely doing the same sort of thing that a blockchain is doing.
I mean,
The record underneath, I should say.
I would imagine, yeah, no, I'm trying to work out the difference.
What is different is the context in which it's operating in. So there's similar who's keeping the record.
Sure.
And the way, yeah, but even Git, Git repository can be separate because I can encrypt it.
Yes.
I can clone it. Not necessarily more. I just
So you can copy and put it somewhere else, but how does it re-simulate? Would you sort of hold that to itself if you make changes?
Right, the idea of remerging stuff.
Remerging things won't happen automatically, and if there's versus distance makes you remerge.
Merge, but there is quite a lot of computer science around what we call CODTs, which are convergent replicated data types, which is basically how do the things break off, just think Git automatically breaking off and coming back together and breaking.
Yeah, especially when you've got functions happening inside that need to synchronize back and change the data.
So the underlying ideas inside the blockchain are actually used everywhere already.
Well, that's like convergence of multiple technologies. Then, in my position, it's almost been trading. Not that I should be trying to be looking at stuff, but not practically working this into my workflow.
Two analysts, one is someone's died, and they're planning.
So you can use parts of it, you don't necessarily have to go
I
all
want
the
to, I
way.
wish I managed to publish. People don't think about it.
So all the computational contracts stuff is still valid.
So it's how
The idea of trying to give them legal veracity is still valid. The idea of running this thing across the machine is still valid. You just don't necessarily have to go full on blockchain to do that.
Yeah, so there's two things. I wish the plan.
So
I don't know.
the legalese stuff is quite independent of blockchains. You've got projects such as Bacterium, which is looking at the building up a supporting structure to handle
Yeah,
disputes
they've got spaces and stuff.
that understands how to interpret legal contracts that are done on an Ethereum blockchain or done on a blockchain. So that's building up the arbitrators and the people with knowledge to understand the representation of the digital population.
Right now, they push towards machine learning and AI, boards understanding these documents, and you can find that a lot of these things are onto these systems. People ingest their documents, they ingest manifest code by its interpretation. Right now, there's something
Probably not that severe, maybe because machine learning models were used with AI typically probabilistic rather than necessarily deterministic.
It's something
I mean, they're not deterministic. Why would they not be deterministic?
The models because they're based on the data underneath them.
But mine's called statistics.
Well, that's not, well, that's to do with Monte Carlo, that's different. That's different than the probability models underneath machine learning.
Well, I suppose it depends how you compare it.
my idea.
Yeah. I mean,
So
I would.
in terms of doing a Monte Carlo simulation, you're just changing the variables within some sort of bounds and rerunning the whole thing. And then building up data sets saying, well, this is, we'll take the median between them, median between them to find out.
or you rent anyway for a day.
Yes.
But the thing is, thinking forward, if that's going to be technology, Google's already implemented the deal.
And so
Yeah.
thinking
And I
about
mean,
it,
have they
it's sort of
Very,
like,
very cool idea.
yeah, well, there's an association which is,
I'm not saying it's,
well, and
but
also as
what I'm trying to get at is,
think about people.
there is going to be a point where you're going to say, this is
And I reckon that would be a great
Now
chance
the-
for a wolf in marketing, I would market.
There's definitely,
And so
if you look at any work on
and
interpretability of machine learning,
and I'm like,
Do you mind if I send that?
that's
back
going to
and
be
take
very
that back
what
to
you're
them?
saying.
Really?
in terms
Yeah, that's
of
brilliant.
Yeah.
I love it.
producing
I
this
kind of
tool
like
code.
I'm very love things like that.
No, but what they are going to do obviously is produce models
Really seriously, they
that
would love it. 'Cause
or
it's
meant
right
to
now.
fit into procedural models. So it's a combination of and so the output of one will act as, for example, like an oracle in a sense to the other.
Chunk of people that all went to
So
another.
if I need
And they
a
went, this
predictive
is our ready
question
to go commercial.
about something, because not all laws
They
restrict it.
No, no.
Very few, but, you know, so it's not necessarily conducive to the idea.
It's more like imagining
Go
you
down
have
later,
a
later, I
space.
guess, maybe 8 months later.
Quick space, very easy
And
website.
now they're just taking over another.
You have a
firm and they're-
equivalent, but it's markup language, complex, which is drag around.
Like,
So all the things are, so that this and this and this and this.
And the reason I went
Get it quite nicely,
I actually
get
found
it to read it,
So can I be a law clerk,
say, give me
capacity and
code
something that I said.
for like,
You know,
I find there's the one that
and I got a job and it was really great.
that I can,
But it
off
was
my client
because,
is,
the director.
Yeah.
is that where are you getting?
Simply through
Yeah,
very
let's
different
guess where
lawyers that I
those
was
sort of things
friends
could
with
be
mine.
used.
Really?
You know, be okay with the fact that
Right, so I think if,
I need to do.
what do you think you wanted to cover more sort of topics or anything else? You guys wanted to cover? Just carry on with the conversation? and-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Super. And,
I managed to set up my own list,
Yep.
but how do I?
right, I mean,
Okay.
especially with juniors.
Import document.
So.
So have you initialized your own repository?
So maybe Wellington.
What's that?
So the way I get it is
They
basically
run past someone.
has got the actual
Wow, they're amazing.
Well, we've got two
You know, I was thinking to a meeting.
Yeah.
We treat her and we kind of sometimes.
Are you able to use yours now at home or?
Yeah, and just be able to, not like doing 4 weeks of
Do you
discovery.
listen to podcasts?
Not
Are you gonna have a seat?
Do you want a couch? There's more couches in the room on the
Be back.
Yeah, I can see you. I can see you guys are going, oh, everyone's tired.
It's a little warm.
It's the warmth and it's the food.
Yeah.
Yeah, all the eating.
Look, I made it through. He deserves I didn't.
And I can see it happening. I thought, I don't think this is me. Probably, I'm doing my best not to.
No, you're great. Absolutely great, yes.
Kakute, yeah.
It looks like no one's
Coming
coming
back tomorrow.
so
Yeah.
have a great birthday.
Thank you.
Oh, tomorrow's birthday.
It is my birthday.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, so I'm going to brunch. with my friends.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, good to meet you too.
Where are you going?
Southern Cross.
Oh, nice.
I got seen in the room.
Thank you, cool.
Actually, let's check this. I
Yeah, nice to meet you.
want to check the
Yeah.
So where were you? You were.
I was, yeah, I was, I didn't get my first commission.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah, so I kind of was like,
Yeah, I'm still.
I reckon, you know how big.
You should, I don't know if you wanna, you can save yourself a mail.
Okay, cool.
If
All right.
you wanna, I'm gonna send you, forward this to you, watch this.
Yeah,
Just
and
get your mail
they,
in there.
But I think that this would actually be quite
It's
a way
a
to have.
mail by guy
So.
when you watch
I
it.
think that there's
It's a Periscope,
a whole
you're not a
chunk up
Periscope.
there, yeah, they're crypto, they
No,
need, you know,
no.
and they haven't thought about their wills.
Periscope, you're not a podcast.
Nobody's doing
Periscopes
it.
are.
Nobody's touching it. They're
I don't know what, I don't know what Periscope is.
So it's a new type of, so you got podcast.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a new type of thing like that.
Whereas I've already set up a full
So it's
package,
fine.
and, you know, they, you know, so it's kind of a nice cool. That's been great. Do that.
do you have kind of like,
Yeah.
when you, student
It's
kind
fine.
of an intake form for
Is he found
doing
an angel
instructions for
investors?
works that you fill out.
Angels, like people, angels.
Well, that's, yeah, that's what we, yeah, we're designing all that. We had, we're using an online
Probably one of the most interesting
thing
talks
called
I've heard
Justly Wills,
from,
and you can kind of,
was on there.
you know, it's
Okay,
basically
I'll show you.
it's almost
The-
form filling. I can just do my will right
Cool.
here, boom, boom, boom.
Maybe you recognize the guy, but he's
But
actually
then
pretty
for more
crazy.
complex
This
ones.
guy out, developed rubber towns.
Sit
Sounds like a
down
very
with
random
the
name.
team,
Watch the talk.
go through what your needs are.
Yeah,
You
well,
need a trust set up,
yeah.
it's
It's,
those sorts of things, right?
One day
What I was talking
when I was
about
down in Christchurch, a few months back.
You get, you have very low level conversations about what blockchains are, and then you meet a guy like this.
Go
Simplify
through all the EPAs and work
But
out
centralised,
that
not
you've
centralised,
got and
Yeah.
my brother and sister, but which of us gets to be the primary and which of us gets
From-
Right, well, that's so good.
which of us
Yeah.
are the little siblings and so dad,
Yeah.
basically, if you
And
can't
so
really
it's
back to
two
the
terrorists,
my
he does.
brother.
Did 1 month pass, you'll probably find the links.
If you want someone to be robust, they just switch it off fast and
You
that's
can watch
one
2 hours of footage, and he touches it on.
A
lot of
science
things.
teacher, very
Pretty
pragmatic.
remarkable.
Right.
One of the things he talks
Stephanie
about
was one of the
blockchains
main
is
nurse, and
Yeah,
we
it's pretty
pretty
cool.
much, all of us would
Yeah,
choose
you don't
to
say
do one
anything.
actually making the decision.
Yeah.
So,
Higher order problems
get nothing.
to solve and higher
Oh, well,
order
there you go, that's not a
things
bad
in
place to sit.
society, because he only cares about
yeah,
the big
Yeah.
changes.
I'm the backup for
Yeah.
personal
Forget
care.
about.
So the way we have it
trees.
set is that you're
Care
going
about
to,
the
you know,
ocean.
you will, and then make, and then you've got a
Yeah,
section, make,
take
you
on
know, you
plates
want to,
and shift within society.
you
And I
want to
don't
be
get,
up your crypto, right? And so,
Metaphorically.
you know,
Oh,
that's
well,
the way
wait,
to do that.
yeah,
I mean, in
You
there,
know, that's the part that I don't handle, that's where they'll discuss it, but it's generally usually quite percentages, percentage of it
and he,
to this person, percentage of this person, because it's really the amounts
Yeah, cool, wow,
that
that's
can
good.
change
Yeah,
everything.
because that's why I
The
really
way
want
people are
to
investing and trading.
I'm
Exactly,
about to
absolutely.
talk
Actually,
to
pretty
Rob
much from being in front of the
about health records, so
Well, you just do
that's
a
more of a
percentage,
kind of a
but
niche
I don't think
thing.
you need to
Just to
attach
do
it
it,
into
good
it.
luck.
You just-
Yeah,
Say you
yeah,
had-
so, but I'd like to, but really I was interested in watching the point of view of its ability to
Yeah,
shift
yeah, yeah,
society,
so you just kind of say, well,
radically,
you know.
you know,
percentage-
reorganise society radically in favour of the commons, really, in favour of, to bring
Bitcoin and this person.
power back.
You know, or I like them very much or something.
I leave, to my nephew, I leave my car, which I crashed and died. To my niece,
Scary.
they're leaving something that looks like it wasn't with anything.
Go and give your DNA to some random company and they answer. So technically you pay, and then you get paid for your DNA. That's now,
Essentially, your.
it's probably, look, I know that it's beneficial because I think
Likely don't know anything about tax.
it's helping solve.
So it's telling them how.
Yeah, sometimes it is beneficial to, but at least you'd like to have some ideas. I mean, what scares me is the way that
And that is.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, did we, sorry, did you sign up on Meetup?
I am on Meetup, and I did say yes as far as the invite.
Cool, I
so-
just, we didn't take a list of who actually turned up. At some point, we may need to know that, but yeah, so, and,
Should we write a little list of the email names and emails who are here?
Yeah,
Just-
yeah, it's
just
a good
write
idea.
We just circled out.
Oh, yeah, okay, you're good on that one, okay.
Discussions.
Cool, so Rochelle will have that, okay, yeah.
You guys
I
get
wanted to talk about one thing today. as
I know,
well,
I was
but
hoping we
just
would,
got
but it
sidetracked.
looks like it's kind of winding up, so that's all right. Maybe next time.
So, okay, so just as a generic invitation, if you are in this part of town and you just want to pop in for an hour and use the Wi-Fi and hang out with us, standing invitation to just grab hot desk when you need to. Every Friday at 4 o'clock we have Open Lab. So I was going to suggest that this coming Friday we kind of report back on stuff and have space to continue the discussion. So I'll send that, get Robert to send that on a meetup. So Friday at 4, same back channel, same back places. Yeah, so if you make it, that would be great. Otherwise, just pretty much any Friday at 4, we're here, and we just talk about what we've been doing for the week. So, and we sometimes have, we also, if you want, I can send out the link to our mailing list, which talks about all the work that we do here and just the government stuff. And we can have themed sessions if you want to have we have emerging tech sessions. I think we've got, we're going to plan on one for blockchain, especially midweek.
Is it worth having a list of contacts and, you know, because I mean, everyone here has got their own little skill set and interests. So is there somewhere that we could say, oh, you know, like
Legal hackers with the chapter kind of info?
so
Rob,
you know,
suggestions?
contacts and
About contacts and stuff
Yeah.
like that.
well, yeah, so you know, somebody's interested in this type of code and like then they'd be interested to meet up with this other person, you know, stuff like that.
We could easily do something under the sort of banner of legal hackers in terms of a simple list of something like, hey, this is my interest area, and sort of use that as a galvanizing area for people to meet and do stuff.
Yeah. Okay.
So, Robert, I was going to say, this Friday would be a good time for the hacking group to. No, we should invite everyone back on Friday. We can link into Tara on a video link if you like.
Yeah.
And basically just resume the discussions, the spillover discussions from this week, and then look to the lab and that's having a host. As she says, having been moving on, but he will be having a host. Another meetup session here, and I don't know if Fridays work for people, but we could make it every so often.
Yeah. So you just wanted to recap next week, Friday?
Yeah,
next
just
week?
what did you hack? Yeah.
We're not, haven't finished with the hack, but we've got a really good, and we don't think we're going to submit a hack, we haven't got
That's
that
fine.
far. But we've shared our email, and we're really keen on progressing this discussion, actually trying to do something real and tangible out of this and create something in this space. So we've got a rough outline of what we want to do. But
So why don't we kind of put a thing of this Friday at 4, which also is my farewell for the day. But yeah, so how about this Friday at 4?
that might work.
So Robert, can we send around? Which I've got access to that mailing list. Do I need to? One of us will send that round the royal week.
Cool. See you guys.
Oh, thank you.
See you.
Yeah.
Here we go.
So yeah, just I'll try and do that. Yeah, for Friday. Yeah.
You've got my email address, haven't you? So
I've got yours. Yep.
do you want to just tag that onto the other mailing?
You can always just
Yeah,
drop
because
us.
are you on the meetup or?
I don't think I am. I can join it.
Okay.
Well, you can always just send us a email at hello.
So I've just been asked a text.
Just send an email to hello@legalhackers.nz, and that will come through to Rachel, myself, and
Oh, cool.
Rochelle, I think.
I only go down the road. I'm only leaving I will no longer be in this building. I'll have a desk down that road.
So you can always just flick us an email about that. And,
Yeah, sure.
but I can just come through.
Just out of interest, what do they talk about in the hackers group? I completely missed it.
So this one over here is looking at a pyramid system.
Thank you.
Thank you for being
Yeah,
doorman.
and Alex is looking
Yeah,
at
for being doorman.
the idea
We're a
of
very good doorman.
governance
Yes,
and
sir.
what happens.
Wear my hat.
You've
See that?
got API access to government corporations.
Yeah.
How you? Yes.
So, the support for people hackers and stuff, like this space and everything else.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah.
Cool.
So, do you look at it?
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. Yeah, well, we could have a quick chat about healthcare records. And
Yeah.
If you want to, I might just terminate this.
Just
Yeah.
finished that.
Um,
How do you present it? Yeah, sorry.
Okay,
You gonna present it? Or just a video?
do you want to?
Yeah, I didn't get around to asking them, I will do.
Yes.
Yeah, Zoom was supposed to be here. Well, it was supposed to be away and I'm away at the moment, and I was just like, well, you're just taking on holiday, I'm gonna go out for the day. So, I'll leave you on AG's. Is she going? Yeah.
She's great.
She's pretty cool.
She's awesome.
Everyone thinks that, that's fine. So, Alex can present about it.
Yay, cool.
She's still-
So, I'm inviting her back on Friday for open lab to kind of continue the discussion. So, yeah. Because there's some people who've had to go away and then just, so we can fill in the gaps and.
Ours could be the basis, pretty cool hat, so I might take them to go back.
I'm just going to ask quickly, I'm just going to have a chat with Robert about healthcare records and the application of blockchain records in healthcare, if anyone's interested.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Okay, Phil, you're gonna talk about it now.
Yeah.
I'm happy to sit here while that goes on around me. If you want to do it.
I'm happy to listen. That
Yeah.
sounds great.
Yeah.
Okay, awesome.
Cool. Just move that a little bit. There we go.
Do you want to use the whiteboard?
Well, I don't know. We can just go with the discussion. I was just going to pull this in a little bit closer. That was all. In terms of what's the problem?
Okay, so I'm thinking there's lots of problems within healthcare. There's lots of pain points. Healthcare really hasn't changed very much. We're still doing things the same way that we've done them for the last 100 years in many ways. Technology's come and changed that a lot, but fundamentally it's still very similar. The application of healthcare records, a blockchain within healthcare records per se, is that the idea, I think, and I'm here to learn, so as well. So it's the idea that possibly the healthcare record can be stored in different silos, accessed by the right authorities, and those authorities be granted permission by the patient and by the fact that they're the right authority, so a doctor or a healthcare professional, and for it to be easily auditable. And but yeah, I mean that's really what I understand. I mean, I think you'd probably be able to tell me more about how it can be applied.
So what's the current setup though? So here in New Zealand. What's the problem with the current setup?
Well,
and what is the current setup?
The current setup at the moment is we have patient records being stored in individual GP surgeries on servers, which use a software like MedTech, which is how we access them and how they're ordered. Some of them are still on paper, so some of the older records are still paper, and a lot of the surgeries are trying to get paperless, so they're scanning the relevant information onto it. The primary care healthcare records are separate to the secondary care healthcare records. We're still often using letters to go between them, which would be sometimes electronic, sometimes paper. And the secondary care and the primary care are often different systems. And there's a whole different system for radiology as well. And if you go abroad, then how can you access that? So there's those kind of problems in terms of the infrastructure, if you like. There's also some problems with just coming in terms of the minutiae of how the healthcare records are used. So how you get funding from OCC and things like that. How the patient can access certain parts of the healthcare record for the purposes of gaining money from insurance companies. So there are a few different problems, and I don't think obviously blockchain is the solution for all of those. But I think there may be. I suppose I'm here to really find out if it is a good solution for certain aspects. And if so, what are they?
So what would, to use Pierre's sort of frame, what would success look like? If you can imagine a new system and stuff like that, what would success look like?
Well, so success would look like, so from the point of view of something outside of blockchain as such, success would look like a patient being able to get the information they need to quickly and easily from a source that's close to them. So, for example, having some really good decision software on a phone, or for one of those smart speakers, on Well, etc. That's completely different software though. But then having that talk very closely to the health professional when they need to, and then the health professional having that information at their fingertips to make any decisions that a human needs to make,
And then that information being kind of everywhere all the time. I suppose that would be a really, you know, it's really, success would look like information being accessible by the patient and by the doctors and all the other relevant health care professionals very quickly, very easily, and it all be the same information and all be of high quality information, and incorporate as many different data sets as possible. That would be success, and that's hugely, I'm sure, hugely complex.
And I might frame this as a discussion around the data commons from a health records point of view, because what you're just describing is basically more or less the problems that we're trying to solve. So I just wonder if we'll use this idea of personal records, health records, to actually motivate some of the data common stuff. I might just wipe this off up here. And one of the things that, so this is actually generic in a sense.
Yes, just, yeah.
Whiteboard, yep, it's whiteboard.
Always read the pen.
Always read.
Blow in the pie and read the pen.
So I'll just throw a couple of boxes and arrows. So what you're describing here from electronic health records is what we're the domain that we're particularly focused on. And if I'll use the argument here that if basically we could improve the electronic health records, the portability of them, etc., we could start to build second order systems that give us, not only do we get efficiencies and the things, we could start to do better investigation of outcomes, etc., of health. So the sort of stuff I was talking about with regards to precision health. And so at the moment, we've kind of got to sit from what you're describing within the health records and push back on me when I talk about this. I'm just interpreting here. We've got a primary healthcare provider. Down there, we may have an NGO who's sort of doing social service type work, mental health, sort of outpatient work and stuff like that, that may be responsible for those sort of things. And then we've got secondary healthcare. Secondary healthcare is hospitals and stuff like that. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So these are our GPs. These are our social sectors, NGOs, and this will be our hospital, radiology, etc. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's different aspects of the hospital. Yeah, as you say, radiology or pathology or blood tests. You know, in the end, it may cross into the NGO. So NGO might be labs.
So where does ACC sit in something like that?
ECC?
Yeah.
ACC. They're an insurer.
So,
They pay the bill. And so they're a product of why the heck did this person go to hospital?
Right.
It's because they fell off their bike, and you know the cost for doing that was broken arm, X-rays, blah blah blah.
Right. Okay. So
And
they're
so
outside that.
ACC would pay for that. Yeah.
Okay, cool. So
Yeah. So they cover. They're basically a national health insurer for us that we'd like have to go and get health insurance for.
yeah.
So, which also means that removes our ability to sue people when something happens.
Which makes it significantly pleasant to hear in Canada, States.
The States in particular. So what we've kind of got here, so what you're saying is that even within these sort of parameters, we've got a whole sort of network of different sort of pockets of information being collected and used between even just in the NGO sector.
Yeah.
And then even that is replicated out in the primary healthcare, because each doctor's patient surgery has got their own sort of system, and they may actually go off and implement it using a different system from each other, even though there's probably two or three primary software providers.
Yeah, so I mean, so they all tend to incorporate into that primary healthcare sector using medtech or MyPractice as the common.
Yeah, and likewise, we've got a similar sort of thing within the hospital systems and operations and stuff like that. So we've got sort of all these sort of different systems going on. So the aim here is obviously we want to basically try and integrate these different systems in different ways so that we can share information between right?
Yeah, yeah.
So
as well as they get, and they are integrated to an extent at the moment.
Yeah, so HL7, HLC7 or HCL7, I can't remember which one it is. One of them. Healthcare Language 7
Right.
is one of the standards for interoperating between systems. FIRE, I think actually has got another one called FIRE. I think it's called FIRE, which is another data encoding standard. So these are actually data encoding standards. So what we're trying to do is basically integrate these systems. Now, we could take the view that a system-centric view, like I've drawn up there, or in this case, we take a person-centric view, which is, if I was to draw it differently, you can say, well, all your records, which they kind of do anyway, are going to be situated relative to me. So me as the patient, I'm the center of the university, rather than at the moment it's the practice, it's the hospital, it's the NGO.
Yeah.
They record, obviously, the record here, and in some way they try to actually, if I go visit the hospital, those records, the activity that occurred as a result of me visiting the hospital will somehow filter back to the primary healthcare.
It does, yeah.
Yeah. So in a sense here, the primary healthcare provider is the primary trusted entity for me from a person-centric point of view. Yep, that's more or less right.
Yep.
Right, so from the data commons point of view, we've got both kind of models going on. One, certainly for the health records, we've got this notion of person-centric use of information. But in a way that's relatively consistent so that we avoid those sort of letters backwards and forwards and trying to make it a little bit more efficient. So we start with this model and say then that all the other systems are going to start to conform to that. Now, a simple answer to that, naive sort of answer would be to give them an identifier that's universal. Right? A single identifier that recognizes me for my electronic health records. And I label every interaction like that. That's actually probably quite undesirable from a privacy and disclosure sort of point of view. Okay. Now, I'll stress probably my thinking here is that a blockchain, etc., is not specifically useful for the health records themselves, but more about bringing up accountable records. So the stuff that Mark was talking about in his talk earlier today. How do you make the systems accountable? These network systems accountable for access. How do you go and look and say, why did you access this system? For what reason? Under what conditions? So building in that auditing and accountability function. And that's kind of where I see sort of stuff like a blockchain technology coming through. But it doesn't necessarily have to be like that. I mean, one company in particular, we got a keyboard there?
Yes, one we prepared earlier.
Oh, aren't you nice? So when we talk about a blockchain, there's certain assumptions when I use that term. One, that it's a peer-to-peer network. Each the peers on that network are validating transactions. And that they're using some form of cryptography to ensure the integrity of each of those transactions, and that what they're replicating is these transactions into some sort of grouping. And therefore they have to work out the order in which things are sent around, what's go, what isn't, so you build up another thing. But the actual technology underneath them is that's an easy password to remember.
Well, that is a feature, not a bug.
I know. Right. Now, one of the companies which actually has New Zealand origins, because its co-founder is a New Zealander from Rotorua, I've got a mouse or something because I need to bring up.
Touch.
Yeah, gotta get used to these things.
Yeah, we should get a mouse as well.
Oh, we're in the browser. Browser.
Sounds like Explorer.
It is.
No, it's Edge.
Is that Edge?
Yeah, it's the Edge.
Right.
Right.
It's Explorer.
So DeepMind. Come on. We're going forward. So DeepMind is a Google company. Have you heard of them before? They are doing effectively a research company that's looking at research about artificial intelligence, machine learning sort of work. They're a London-based company, and they've been doing a whole chunk of work. They actually just got recently slammed by the Information Commissioner, right there, UK's equivalent of the Privacy Commissioner, for the work that they're doing around electronic health records. Basically because they didn't seek the appropriate consent that this information was being passed over from one of the hospitals into DeepMind's system. But that aside,
Their AI can play Go quite well. Is that the right group? Their AI, they won a bunch of competitions around playing Go.
they're the ones that do outgo. Yep. And it's actually got the co-founder is a New Zealander from Victoria. It is masters in Auckland University.
Maybe if you fire up Google Chrome.
Chrome is in there somewhere.
Was it?
Chrome is on the desktop.
Firefox.
I don't know.
My open source.
Oh, cancel.
Oh, it's fancies.
Oh, there we go. All right.
It's getting used to this interaction mode. There we are. Right. So. So they're building an open source project called what's it called? It's fun here. I gotta click on this. Trust government is verifiable through deep audit. Am I going in? There we go. So, a lot of this sort of work here, so this is what they're doing, is building a verifiable data vault. Okay, and it's actually using a lot of the same technical ideas that underpin a blockchain. But it's not designed to be a peer-to-peer network as such. Instead, what they're doing is producing an audit log, not unlike a blockchain, right, such that you can actually see when changes are done or not. So someone else can come in and inspect and say, oh, have you done what you said you're going to do? And if you go back and try to change your history, in retrospect, and go back and change it, it will be picked up because of the way the technology works. I can go and inspect it. I can inspect it today, and I can inspect it tomorrow. And if you try to go back on things, I've got proof to show that you've gone back on things. So this means that I can efficiently do something which enables me to record all the interactions or all the access patterns to a particular bit of data, okay, without necessarily having to go into a full sort of blockchain scenario. So this is sort of the work they're doing. There's a whole number of papers. So what they refer to it as a verifiable data audit for health records. Because what they're interested in trying to do is start to analyze all this health record information that's going on. Now, this is the sort of structure that they're wanting to do to try and enable me to store the health records securely, to enable me to access them as in some meaningful way. Very similar technically to a blockchain in terms of the underlying cryptography, etc., but it's not a blockchain. Admittedly, they ran into trouble with as I say, how they went about their contracts and stuff like that. I'm trying to find it. You notice I've got formal methods, accountability. The project itself that it's based on is something called Trillium. So that's an open source project. And it's actually based off work from your point of certificate of transparency. To be an alternative to pinning certificates, etc., to actually recognise the changes in them. And in fact, Ben Laurie, one of the principal guys behind this, was involved in certificate transparency. So this is the project Trillium. And as I said, what it's really doing is saying we can shove data into this vault, right? And as we shove stuff into that vault, we'll keep a cryptographic record of what was put in there, right? And who accessed it, when, where, and we'll produce that log in such a way that you can independently verify that we're not cheating. So that's a sort of technical solution, but by no means it's the only one. And this is what, with respect to the data commons sort of work. So we're trying to integrate all these sort of systems, but we've got to incorporate a notion of user centricity or person-centric records. So how do we do that? The naive answer is a single identifier, but there's real problems with doing that. Right? So instead, what we're doing, one of the things to think about all of this is that there's two parts to this that's going on. One of the things often that a blockchain network gets described as is a distributed database. And you kind of go, oh, what does that mean? It really kind of just means that we've got some sort of data layer. So this is actually, you kind of got some sort of data layer in here. And what I mean by a data layer is some way to actually access your data in some particular regard, format, encodings, or what. Now, how that data is stored or anything else like that is where something like a verified vault comes into it. So we can say in here we've got a verified vault. We can do some other stuff in here, which is if we're trying to produce these accountable records, and it's important for a network, a community of health providers to know that they're all respecting and conforming to the rules, that's where we want an accounting layer, a network accounting database. And that's your blockchain.
Because at the moment, when healthcare records are input into medtech and whatnot, they do have an audit trail. You know, you can't go back and change previously input data. I mean, all it is text in health records. You know, consult, this patient came in and see that you put it in. And yeah, you can't really change. You can't change somebody else's. And once it's in there, you can't change it. You know, so for example, you forget to ask a really important question to the patient, and some bad consequences happen because you didn't ask that question. You can't go back and pretend that you did answer that question when you didn't.
Yeah. So it's how you create those records. So a lot of the systems at the moment assume a trusted domain in which they do it in. And that so a company or whatever or organisation has stood up to be the custodian of that data. Yeah. In many cases, or in the case of the primary healthcare provider, they are the custodian for their patient records type situation. And the software system they use is, you know, you might get a third party coming in to audit it. You might get someone coming to make sure they've got all the security checks of their systems, etc. But they're not with the sort of threat models and things like that that is occurring now from a cybersecurity sort of infosec security point of view, is they're not really up to speed in securing their systems, etc. And a lot of the software systems that have been written or used today assume a certain security model, which is no longer really valid as well. In the sense that, well, if you can't get inside our firewall, you know, that's how we protect our systems. But once you're inside, you can do what you like and go in and tweak things and change things around. So I could go into the database underneath the hood and change it, even though the application at the top won't let you do that. I could sneak in the back door.
And if there was some kind of blockchain, or if they were
if they were sort of distributed in those, you would be able to do that. Is that right?
Well, it's more like even, it doesn't necessarily have to be a blockchain sort of stuff, and this is what the trillion things is basically doing, is basically by using, to make it even more difficult for insiders to come in and tweak and change the audit records for whatever reason, we're using cryptography to ensure that they can't do that. A combination of cryptography and in the case of Trillion, a small amount of distributed computing, in the sense that I can pull the verified logs from you, I can quickly validate them that you're telling the truth today, and that you haven't gone back the next day and rewritten stuff, and I can do that really efficiently. So I can constantly query you as a provider to check in on you. Are you playing by the rules? And I can independently verify that according to the verified logs. So that's about building a sort of auditing sort of culture and stuff like that. But that still, you are still independent. You're independent. It's up to me to go off and query each one of you to make sure that you're all playing the role accordingly. And so if there's quite a complex network going on, that's when the sort of blockchain starts to come into play, in the sense that, well, we're going to put all our audit records into this one repository to say what we've done, or who accessed what, and the sort of conditions. And so instead of me having to go off and check each one of you to say that how you're playing by the rules, I can just go and look at the blockchain network and say, oh yeah, everyone's playing by the rules because of the structure of it. We know that certain transactions have been entered, right? So it's just lowering the cost of coordination for doing that checking, okay? But we've still got the notions of verified vaults, because that's where we'd sort of store all our personal identifiable information, right? So these are purely just sort of accounting records to administer the custodial role of these electronic health records, okay? We've still got the independent systems going on, and we still basically want to be able to say, well, this system needs to transfer a bit of information between that, or in this case here, I've gone to visit the hospital, so it needs to transfer back, okay? So it still needs to be able to do that. And up here, we have a whole bunch of different applications, because in a sense, this is creating this data layer. And these are applications. So this is my personal record, my personal health record, right? And this may be a clinician's patient view, and whatever else.
And that they would, because that's the other thing, that a patient viewing their health records is sometimes not ideal, because there might be
like the comments and stuff that the surgeons put in, etc., and the amount of information that you reveal, etc.
Yeah. So sometimes it's good for patients to see certain things, but you don't want them to see everything. And but and likewise, you don't need all of the healthcare professionals to see everything as well. Certain very sensitive information, you do want really just one.
Right, so a large part of that is coming down to how you actually store and where you store stuff, okay? So this idea of selective disclosure. So only sort of revealing certain things based on a particular role that an individual is playing within the overall system. So selective disclosure might be, we've got the full, if you're a specialist, you've written up the full notes, but we don't actually want those notes revealed to the patient. But from a governance point of view, from an accountability point of view, if we go through the appropriate channels, they should be revealed. And they can be revealed if, you go through the medical professional and stuff like that, to the patient. But there's a process to go through it.
Yeah, like right now, a patient can just ask if they want to access all of their health records, and they can, but within a certain time frame. And sometimes it can be problematic.
Right, and you don't necessarily want to make it instantaneously available to them because of the the sensitivities around their treatment, and certain treatments will be a problem. Part of it is also just general patient. Part of the health treatment of things is actually keeping the spirits of the individual up high. So if they knew the full reality or something else, it might actually. That's my presumption about certain things. Anyway.
Yes, those
sort of things. So it's not clear cut. So the personal health record sort of stuff might be showing particular entries that can be disclosed according to some sort of permission rules. But in this sense here, this application may be accessing directly there, right? But as it does so, in terms of the verified vault, it will be reporting back, the verified vault in some way will be reporting back to your blockchain network to say this happened. Or just the verified vault itself is declaring that patient X has done this. Someone come in and access this verified vault under these conditions. I'm not going to reveal to the whole blockchain network what that is, but I'm going to say someone's accessed it. Or a cohort of people have accessed things today, and that's what I'll report into the network. But more specifically here within the data commons sort of work is that what we're actually interested in is systems to systems integration. So when I visit the hospital, how do I get that data back to my primary health care provider? However their system is implemented. It could be sitting in a cloud-based infrastructure and say the Catalyst Cloud, or it could be sitting in their server, sitting in their practice.
So that's a big thing at the moment, isn't it? The system's not talking to each other.
Yeah, but there are standards for the healthcare sort of record. It's really just what level is the technologies at for the respective healthcare providers. So one of the things you could argue with a communal sort of area like this, which is effectively what a blockchain creates, is it creates incentives for them to upgrade, to get up to speed, to get to the same sort of standards. So there's this, in a sense, by making it sort of a permissions-based sort of ledger sort of work, forces everyone to lift their game.
Except I was at a thing in Melbourne this week, and there was talk about healthcare and stuff, and so people that were there in this industry said that the problem is that at the moment the networks are proprietary. I mean, and they make it as hard as possible to share any information. But this is where the government can come up, because you can have the technology, but what's the incentive for them to do it? So it could be, we can't use you until you conform to these standards, but something needs to, there needs to be some push to do it, because otherwise. Yeah,
so you could take government regulation to say that thou shalt use this sort of standard, but before you go off and do that, that's kind of got to be tested and put into practice and tried out.
Oh, yeah.
So in that sense here, if I was looking at it from taking the position of the data commons sort of work, the data commons for precision health or health care records themselves could basically act as a sandbox to help understand what the implications and difficulties are. And by trying to encourage people to put their records into something like this, we can still interface with existing systems through something like HL7 and the FHIR sort of standards. So we can still go into your primary healthcare provider or your secondary healthcare provider. But we can start to change that model of being patient-centric, giving them the portability, the data portability, to enable them to decide where things are going, where my health records should be stored.
So these health records would be residing in that and not on they'd still be on separate providers?
They could still be on a separate provider's installation, or you could say, because actually in this sort of network, the idea of a verified vault is actually just another service as far as the data commons is concerned. It's following the Trillium model. So that's just another service, and that could be sitting in a number of different locations. What we're trying to do is say, eventually the healthcare provider here, or in this particular scenario where I've gone and visited the hospital, right, they will need to update or put the records back into whoever I choose to hold on to those records. So in this case here, the primary healthcare provider could be using a verified vault service like Trillium, right? That's provided just as a service for storing electronic health records. And that's where they stack things. They've got their own systems sitting on top of that, using that for their own internal purposes, right? But the actual patient records are eventually put into this area, right? Which means that when any sort of records over here for their systems, right? When they have to update their systems, right? In this case here, the chain is going back into this area. I'm stashing because I'm saying my healthcare provider has got their own verified vault, and that's where it's going. And as I do that interaction, it's getting effectively reported back into something like a blockchain network to say that this action or this privilege was taken invoked. This ability to report under these conditions that this record is updated.
Because that's quite. It's also quite interesting how payment flows through that whole thing as well. So if certain conditions are met, you know, something as simple as I've gone to see a doctor and had a consult, then payment could be automatic with a smart contract.
Yes, absolutely.
And
Yeah.
you know, and like I've gone to have a blood test, therefore there's an automatic computational contract that will allow.
So the auditing functions acts as clearance to say that certain things have taken place.
Yeah.
And then you can layer on top of that all the settlement, which is to pay up on a netting basis or whatever each night.
Yeah. So and that would disrupt a lot of the receptionists' jobs in presumably a lot of receptionist jobs in surgeries.
Okay.
I would imagine, and like a lot of their stuff.
So there was sort of discussions, like often one of the ones, and it was brought up last night, I think, about trade factoring, based on invoices, you know, to deal with payment flows and stuff like that. It's a common case within blockchain projects. Is there's certain things like remittance and trade factoring that seem to keep cropping up all the time. But that's the sort of idea that's going on here in terms of you can do, I've done the work, so pay me for it.
But also what you can do, my understanding is, I'm not that sure about health, but my understanding was that you get paid per per patient that's enrolled. So you get a lump sum, you get a bulk funding.
Yeah, yeah.
Which is crazy because if someone if you don't go and see the doctor, you get paid the same. Or if someone comes a lot, they don't get as much money. So this way you could actually have it per per visit rather than. That could be much more granular.
Yeah, it could be. Definitely, you could do
because
that.
Some people are actually doing far more work than they're getting paid for, and other people are not doing much work and they're getting
so in order to do that, though, you'd have to start to formalise the types of
yes.
Transactions that are occurring.
But you can do it through smart.
Yeah, you definitely do that. So it would be starting to formalise and look at what are all the different types of transactions and what data do they support. And then you start getting into the broader questions of the semantics of those transactions and the type of information. But there's already, I can't remember the name of it now, but there's a whole lot of formalisms around the taxonomy of diseases and stuff and conditions, etc. So that's well formalised.
But also, I remember listening to something a while ago, and they've done these experiments overseas. I think it was in the States actually, and there are certain people which are incredible, a lot of resources put into them, but then they don't make appointments and don't make these things. So they did this thing of wraparound services for these very high dependency, and they did it, and they actually, it ended up saving a whole lot of money. But of course, the trial was discontinued, and because what I'm saying is, if you have a thing where you're being paid per visit and there's a cap, then those people may not be accessing the thing, and the doctors won't want to do it. There could actually be more sort of knock-on effects, the unintended consequences. So you've got to be careful whatever system that you have.
Yep.
Because I can tell you with doctors and all those, with any of those professionals and things, there's a reasonable amount of abortion that goes on. It's not everybody, but there's and also if we double claiming.
If there's rules, the rules will be game, and it doesn't really matter what field or profession or anything else. And in many respects, that's what a blockchain network tries to. A lot of the effort in terms of infrastructure projects is around the mechanism designs to prevent invalid transactions being entered into the network. Most of that function, though, is focused on relatively simple transactions. Whereas if we were to do a payment sort of system, granular sort of payments based on per visit or information provided and stuff, you'd actually end up quite a lot of different sort of transaction types and need to validate that the data, how do you go about validating that the data provided is in the appropriate schema and format, etc. But it's certainly possible, but you're not putting health information on the blockchain per se. The blockchain there is just acting as its accounting function.
Yeah.
For auditing, for assurance, for incentives. If you are doing settlement on a blockchain through a token mechanism, or internal monetary system. To ease settlements, which is quite possible as well, you can start to introduce incentives to ensure that the participants play according to the rules.
So if the information is not on the blockchain, can you still use it for like second level things like having alerts if someone's at risk because of certain factors coinciding?
Yeah, so the whole idea within, say, the context of the data commons, and this is kind of more or less the data commons, we've got an identity system sitting out to the side here. There's something called OCAPs, which I won't get into here at the moment, but so we've got some sort of identity system, and that identity system is largely importing ideas of verified claims. Which are, I'm a patient X, etc. And that I've got autism, I've got a medical certificate, that sort of thing, to prove what's going on. Sorry, what was your original question? Scott.
If the information isn't on the blockchain, does that mean are certain things still accessible, like certain?
Right, yeah. So the whole intention, I'll speak within the context of the data commons, the whole intention is to make that accessible. Okay, under auditable functions, transparent and auditable functions. So in this case here, if we're storing the data as a verified data vault, in a data vault in certain formats, and we've got rules around how that's accessed and the reporting back, then essentially, and this is where the sort of idea of human-centric ideas of data storage come into it. I can specify where that data is, and by virtue of the fact that I've got contracts for access, is letting me access those services underneath the hood.
Are these identity platforms, are they
Where are you
on?
up to? I'll just... Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty close to the end of the day, isn't it, really?
Can I have my tripod, please? Oh, no, don't. Just bring it tomorrow. Just bring it tomorrow. Just bring it tomorrow. I'll give it. Father, son. The whole idea is to make it portable so that you can access it from any sort of system. At the moment, the thing is that I've got a system over here, a silo over here, right? That and because it's a silo, it doesn't mean that means I can control who accesses who, what, and gives me an advantage. If we've got a strong notion of identity, or whatever form that takes, accountable records, and build into that the notions of data portability, then you should be able to access it from any system. So this is not storing my personal records over here other than what they need for their fiduciary functions, for their own internal audits and stuff like that. And instead we've designated the primary healthcare provider as being our trusted store for all my health records. But because of the way the system is architected in principle, so because this is all theory, is that under the contracts of access, because what we're negotiating within this market is what services can access what. So there's a contract between the secondary healthcare provider and the primary healthcare provider to access my personal data vault. And that simply could be because I've rocked on up to the hospital with a broken arm, and they've asked for consent to access that. And that consent may include, or only include, the ability to write to it, or to extract only minimal information about my contact information and what I am. Or it could query this to say, hey, what allergies do I have? Because I might have to go in for surgery or something else like that. So, am I allergic to penicillin? The data is still over here, but what I'm doing is I'm giving this system permission to access that. And as it does access that, that record is added back into the blockchain network to enable it to be audited to hold that access to account, to be accountable. that's sort of back of the envelope sketch of how it possibly could be done and where the pieces fit in. But I definitely don't see health records being stored on a blockchain.
It would just be too huge. I mean, you've got there's certain aspects. The digital identity, there's a New Zealand company, Sphere, which is on the Air platform. I don't know if you've been
Yeah, apparently Sphere's in Auckland.
Sphere,
Yeah, I think,
Frank Strainer.
Oh, is he behind it?
Yeah.
Okay. No, there was a thing a year or so ago, a blockchain association came into the presentation, was really good, and I hadn't heard, and I heard about it this week, and they're they're based in Auckland, I think.
Yeah, part of Brave New Forum. They're doing digital identity, and they've got a knockoff which is looking at healthcare records.
Yeah.
So, and I was going to talk, we've been talking to them a little bit about it, and yeah, I mean, they're the same kind of area, back of the envelope kind of, they're mainly concentrating on that digital identity first, and then after that there'll be, I mean, it's interesting to see this as a possible solution to some of the, who gets what information when, in terms of like at the coalface for a clinician. There's many other ways. I think computers can help, like what Matty was saying earlier on about how he's got this law engine, I think he called it, where you input some data and then it comes out with decisions about certain aspects. I thought that was very interesting, and that's something that I'd really like to get into as well. But that's a sort of a different.
That's more like the analytical components.
Exactly, and that's
decision support sort of systems.
Yeah,
they can function by getting access to better information.
Yes, yeah. So with these no, they're not like oracles, then, are they? No, they're not oracles.
The doctor here is the oracle.
Yeah.
So that's literally you're assuming a professional code of ethics and what they're putting in.
Yeah.
Is of standards.
Yeah.
You can certainly go off and build some technical infrastructure that tries to ensure that to some degree. For example, like selecting from being able to select efficiently the diagnosis or the condition, for example, such that they're standardized. So the vocabulary used is always consistent. But in the end, we're still relying on a professional code of ethics to ensure that the doctor is actually reporting and things correctly and fairly.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, they are the oracle.
From a security point of view, as far as information is not being stored on a blockchain, but we have our data layer here, where is this physically being stored?
The verified vaults and stuff like that, could be any sort of cloud provider. One of the assumptions within Data Commons is that our computer is the data center.
Yeah.
So it could be stored in Catalyst Cloud, it could be stored in an AWS server in Hong Kong or whatever. Now, part of the conditions of where those sort of things concern are going to be issues of data sovereignty and locality related stuff. So in the case of medical health records, we'll probably say, well, we actually want them stored somewhere here in New Zealand.
But would you want just at least like 2 or 3 copies, or something like this? So they have different copies in different areas.
So that's as far as this sort of layer is concerned, that's up to the implementation of this thing.
Yeah.
And we can sort of do things like you can provide open source code for this. You could say, right, well, this is for storing health records. Part of the requirement is that you've got to have multiple copies of it, and they've got to reach some sort of level of security for storage and network. Levels. You've also got archive and cold storage components. How often do you actually back that up to cold storage? Because not all data needs to be online all the time.
Yeah.
Okay. So you can start to, within this abstraction, this idea of a verified vault can be an arbitrarily complex system in its own right. But we're saying the abstraction here is that it's producing these verifiable logs that you can shove data into it.
Do you mind if I take a picture of that?
Yeah, go for it. And that's the part of the big point around all of this sort of functionality, which stands for object capabilities, is to enable that distribution of. So this is really kind of the heart of what does the distributed identity and access management, and conforms to the reporting side of things. So that's an OCAP system. And in a sense, what we're doing here is that the actual OCAPs, the capabilities are sitting at this end in a particular environment of that service.
So it's just identity and access management, or does it do the, so my question is these.
It encapsulates communication and access. So that's the idea. So it will be doing things like identity and access management, billing, accounting, reporting, those sort of things, back into this component here.
Does it do where the doctors or surgeons are updating information? I'm just wondering, so if we have these data vaults, can we have like multiple vaults sort of wherever we want, and they're all being updated?
Yeah,
such
that would be the desirable property. Yeah.
Cool.
That I, as a patient, can designate who is my primary healthcare data storage provider.
Because for me, that's the sort of main part of security for that. Because really, then I don't have too much concern about losing a chunk of them, as long as there's still enough to obviously replicate the data and all that stuff. So,
So there's all sorts of ways this could be implemented, from to ensure that it's really secure, to ensure that it's reliable, to ensure that it's got the backup capabilities and
redundancy. Once you have that, then
As far as the data commons is concerned itself, this is just a big aggregate component that says, hey, this is what we want from a specification of a system like this. It could be small in terms of implementation, running on a really tiny machine because I want to have it in my NAS at home. Equally, it could be a very large system that is tightly controlled and implemented in a Google data center, much like DeepMind does with their own special hardware, all the network security on every single component, locked down in terms of personal access and all the rest of it. It doesn't change that abstraction. Okay, so the model here is that you've got this ability to move it around and partition it up as well. You should be able to do different rules. But the main function of the blockchain network is to do all the accounting functions. And what those accounting functions are, that's the business processes that can include compensation settlement, can include clearance events. So this activity happens, so therefore that might trigger settlement if that was required. So that's a design parameter within this component.
Would you have their own token kind of? So like the idea behind Sphere is that I think they have their own air token, which I don't know how it quite works, to be honest. You apparently get paid for viewing some content or adverts or something.
A lot of cases of I don't know what Sphere's doing, but so I'll speak generically here about a lot of the sort of token projects. Is that they're doing a very, very simple notion of what money is. They're just really kind of replicating the old sort of system, so to speak. Within this sort of technology, you can produce quite complex monetary systems, and you align those monetary systems according to the incentives that you're trying to induce or signal to participants within the network. Right? Or address certain problems. So, for example, you might have one token which is pegged to a national currency, right, within this system, and that's used for settlement and only settlement. And the reason why it's pegged is because you haven't got any volatility, so at least the doctors or whatever still know what they're going to get. But underneath the hoods, to actually do all the other sort of functioning, you've got other notions of credit, debt. You've got more free-flowing sort of token as well that could be used for different purposes. And so you can create a number of different tokens within the system to organize the financial model, to induce the incentives, or to create the incentives is probably a better way of describing it. That helps participants signal and each other to determine what actions to take. I choose those words quite carefully. What actions to take is like, well, we need our data for a particular disease in this format. But the system over here only produces it in this way. So I can't directly put that data into this system. So I need an intermediary that comes along and does the transformation for me. And because there's so many installations in the hospitals of this particular software system, I can signal to the market, the software developers and stuff like that, hey, we actually need this conversion from HCL7 into, say, FHIR, because this system over here takes FHIR, which is a different encoding standard, as an example. And that's the idea to help improve that portability and that integration of data over time. Whereas at the moment, it's largely, well, we haven't got these notions of data portability, etc. So everyone's building their own little silos, and it's going to be up to them to decide what's in their interest to add on to their health record system, for example.
Yeah.
So Ryan, doing that, can decide up to them. Whereas in a marketplace like this, if you took it to its logical conclusion, if you created a health records commons, right, you could actually incentivize innovation within that network to enable all sorts of developers to come along and start to provide services that help with decision support, for example.
Yeah. So you could do that if you so you hang on. I'll just get what you're saying is correct. If I'm correct in hearing what you're saying, that if you could design within that system certain incentives for parties within that system to do certain things, you're saying that you would be able to incentivize development of other software or applications to it. So, for example, if somebody wanted to create an application that would help with the diagnosis of some specific disease, then you would be able to kind of incentivize this. How would you do that? You would incentivize the speed of, like, we've got a problem here, this disease is not being diagnosed appropriately, but if you can come up with a solution, then
and then someone needs to come up with a solution, needs access to the data and stuff like that, so that you can sort of propose.
Right. Oh, okay, right.
And say, oh, I need access to the data. We've got this demand over here because we've seen that, within this commons, electronic health records commons, that doctors or clinicians or whatever are wanting to be able to do this, right? But we haven't got the data, so we need access to the data to be able to prove that our algorithms are doing correct things correctly.
Yeah.
So I can go back to the commons with a proposal and say, we want to do this, can I get access to the data to build this? And so on.
I see. So hence why it is so valuable, I guess, because of the fact that patient health records are immensely valuable from that point of view, because of the data that's in them, and so therefore problem solving. Yeah, needing the data. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. So I think I'll leave it at that because my throat's getting a bit.
Yeah. It's pretty. What's the time?
6 o'clock. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Robert.
Thank you.
Just as you guys were talking, and I saw both Estonia and Dubai are putting their medical records on a blockchain at the moment, so it's worth looking into it. I mean, I think they're probably, like we were saying earlier, they have very different kind of system. They have one ID per person for the entire.
Estonia is like well up with it,
Yeah. And Dubai wants to have all government documents onto a blockchain, I think by 2020, which is quite bold. But anyway, it's worth looking into, whether what they're doing could somehow work.
Yeah, there's quite a lot of different proposals coming through for electronic health records from academic and also what some governments are trying to do. I can't say I've looked at all of them.
Yeah.
It's like, that's not the domain I'm just focused on at the moment. So that's just a sort of sketch out of the top of my head of how I might approach it within the context of data commons work.
So say I got hold of Fran and the Sphere and they're working on these identity platforms, and they wanted to start. They probably are thinking about now to start to really push the healthcare records thing forward. I'm just trying to think if we could sort of work together really to, like,
Yeah, so
get that.
I'm not over this at the moment, but within the data commons work, as far as I understand, Lance Sutherland is quite interested in working with us. So health is a section area that is very applicable to the data commons work.
Right. Sorry, I don't know. Lance Sutherland is here.
Dr. Lance Sutherland is.
Yeah, I've heard of this guy.
Yeah, does a whole lot up in
Northland. Yes.
District Health.
Yeah,
Quite
yeah.
outspoken.
New Zealand of the year.
That's correct.
Yeah.
So he's doing stuff with my iwi Ngāti Runui around Aimoko, which is a help my way of accessing health in remote locations, etc., for non-critical diagnosis.
Yeah.
So like a telemedicine type situation as well. So doing pop-up clinics, etc., to ensure that people come in at primary health level to get sort of those basics of diagnostics.
Yeah.
So there's that, and then there's sort of other related areas as well. It's just not one I've looked at closely.
Worth getting into though.
So hopefully that's food for thought.
Yeah, very much so.
I'm going to call it.
Guys, I forgot to ask of you this. This is actually about what our work we do here. We brought that sort of done for T5.